Long before Moses ever stood before Pharaoh or parted the Red Sea, there was a quiet, desperate moment, a mother's trembling hands, a baby's soft cry, and a river that carried destiny. It was a dark time in Egypt. The Hebrews, once honored guests in Joseph's day, had become slaves under a cruel Pharaoh who feared their growing strength. He gave an unthinkable command that every baby boy born to the Israelites must be thrown into the Nile River. Death had a voice in Egypt, and fear filled every home of the Hebrew people. But there was one woman who refused to let fear write the end of her child's story. Her name was Jochebed. She looked at her baby and saw something special, a spark of divine purpose in his eyes. She could not explain it, but deep in her heart, she knew this child belonged to God. For 3 months she hid him, nursing him in silence, praying over him in the shadows, hoping each passing day would bring a miracle. But babies grow and cries grow louder. She knew she could hide him no longer. With a heart breaking yet full of faith, she built a tiny ark, a basket made of reeds, sealed with tar and lined with love. She placed her precious son inside, kissed his forehead, and whispered a prayer that would echo through eternity. Lord, into your hands, I place my child. As the basket drifted into the Nile, the river that symbolized death became the very water that carried life. The same waves meant for destruction became waves of divine protection. Because when God has a purpose for your life, not even the pharaohs of this world can stop it. The basket floated gently until it reached the place where Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. There, among the reeds, she saw the basket. She opened it and found a crying Hebrew baby. But instead of turning away, her heart was moved with compassion. She said, "This is one of the Hebrew babies." That single act of mercy changed history. And here's where we see the fingerprints of God. Jochebed's daughter, Miriam, was watching from a distance. She ran up and asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I find someone to nurse the baby for you?" And so, in a divine twist only God could write, Moses' own mother was called to nurse and raise him, safely, under Pharaoh's protection, and paid for by Pharaoh's household. When God writes your story, even your enemies end up funding your destiny. Moses grew up in the palace, surrounded by gold, learning Egyptian wisdom, wearing royal robes. But deep within him, the echo of his true identity never left. He was a child of promise, raised in a place of power, yet destined to serve a higher king. The baby in the basket became a man who would one day lead a nation. But before that could happen, he needed to understand who he truly was. God had hidden him in Pharaoh's house, not to make him forget his people, but to prepare him for his calling. Sometimes God hides you in unexpected places to shape your heart for something greater. You may feel like you're drifting, like your purpose is floating in uncertainty, surrounded by waves of fear, rejection, or delay. But remember this, Moses was not abandoned, he was being guided. The current of the Nile was not random, it was divine direction. Every detail, the timing, the place, the people, was orchestrated by God's unseen hand. Herb lessons for us today. 1. God's plan is bigger than man's threat. Pharaoh's command was cruel, but it couldn't stop God's promise. In your life, too, there may be voices of fear, systems of oppression, or people who try to silence your potential. But if God has called you, nothing can destroy what He has designed. Mother's faith can move mountains. Jochebed didn't have soldiers, she didn't have wealth, but she had faith. She didn't let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she built a basket. Sometimes, faith looks like doing something small and trusting God for something great. 3. The river that scares you might carry you to your destiny. What looks like danger may be the very thing that delivers you. The Nile was a place of death, yet for Moses, it became the path to purpose. Don't fear the river, God is in the flow. 4. God can use anyone to protect you. Pharaoh's daughter, the very child of the man who wanted to kill Hebrew babies, became the one who saved Moses. God can raise up help from the most unexpected places. 5. Hidden seasons are holy seasons. For years, Moses lived quietly in Pharaoh's house, learning, observing, waiting. You might feel unseen today, but that's okay. Even Moses had a hidden season before his calling began. Don't rush God's process. The basket was temporary, but the purpose was eternal. Speech balloon reflection for the heart. When you think about the baby in the basket, you see the essence of trust. A mother placed her most precious gift in something fragile, yet she believed in a God unbreakable. That's the faith God calls us to have. Maybe right now, you're being asked to place something in the river, a dream, a relationship, a plan, a future. It feels risky. It feels like loss. But when you let go, God takes control. And He will not let what's meant for destruction drown what's meant for destiny. Moses' journey teaches us that purpose often begins in surrender. Before he could lead millions, someone had to release him into God's care. Some behind small cloud ending message. As you listen to this story, remember, you, too, were born for a purpose. You are not an accident. You are part of a divine design that began long before you were born. Just as God watched over Moses in that river, He watches over you in every storm. Even when you feel small, forgotten, or adrift, the same God who guided that tiny basket across the Nile is guiding your steps today. He sees you. He knows you. And He has already written your story. Because when God has chosen you, the river cannot drown you. When God has called you, the enemy cannot find you. And when God's purpose is over your life, even a basket of reeds becomes a vessel of destiny. So keep trusting, keep believing, and keep floating in faith. You never know, your basket might just be the beginning of something that changes history. Moses had everything a man could dream of. He grew up surrounded by luxury, marble floors, golden pillars, and servants who bowed when he entered. Pharaoh's palace was the heart of Egypt, and Moses was raised as a prince within its mighty walls. He spoke Egyptian fluently. He wore fine linen. He was taught the ways of power and leadership. To everyone who saw him, Moses was a man destined for greatness, the adopted grandson of Pharaoh himself. But deep within, his heart carried a secret. He knew he didn't belong there. He wasn't Egyptian. He was a Hebrew, one of the enslaved people laboring under the hot desert sun. And though he lived in the palace, he couldn't silence the cries of his people that echoed across the land. Every morning he saw the whip fall on their backs. Every evening he heard the moans of exhaustion rise to the heavens. Something inside him stirred, a quiet fire, a longing for justice, a whisper from God saying, "You were not born for comfort. You were born for calling." Balance scale, a moment that changed everything. One day, Moses left the palace and walked among the Hebrew workers. He saw an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave, one of his own people. The scene burned into his soul. The cries pierced his heart. Moses looked around, no one was watching. Rage and compassion collided inside him. He acted out of impulse, out of pain, out of a desperate need to do something. He struck the Egyptian and killed him. In that single moment, everything changed. The prince of Egypt became a murderer. The man who wanted to save his people now had to save himself. He buried the body in the sand, hoping the desert would hide his mistake. But guilt cannot be buried. The next day, he saw two Hebrews fighting and tried to stop them. One of them looked at him and said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" The words hit Moses like lightning. Fear gripped his heart. His secret was out. Pharaoh soon heard what had happened and sought to kill him. And so Moses ran. He fled Egypt, the land of power and privilege, and stepped into the wilderness, alone and broken. Cactus the wilderness, a place of breaking. For days he wandered, exhausted and afraid. The desert stretched endlessly, hot winds, shifting sand, and silence so deep it made him face himself. The same hands that once held a royal scepter now held nothing but a staff of survival. He finally reached a place called Midian. There, near a well, he sat down, thirsty, weary, and unsure of what his life meant anymore. But God was already there, waiting. At that well, Moses met 7 young women, daughters of a Midianite priest named Jethro, struggling to water their flock because other shepherds were pushing them away. Even in exile, Moses' heart for justice awakened again. He stood up, defended them, and helped draw water for their sheep. And just like that, destiny took another quiet turn. The women told their father about the Egyptian who helped them. Jethro invited Moses to his home. He offered him food, shelter, and eventually, his daughter Zipporah's hand in marriage. The fugitive became a husband, a shepherd, and a father. Years passed. Moses tended sheep in the wilderness, day after day. The same desert that once felt like punishment became his classroom of transformation. He learned the rhythm of silence. He learned to wait. He learned how to lead a flock, not by force, but with gentleness. He didn't know it yet, but God was teaching him how to lead his people one day. Hourglass not done. The desert is not the end, it's preparation. Many people see the desert as a place of loss, of failure, of exile, of punishment. But in God's story, the desert is never the end. It's always the in-between. It's the place where God strips away who you were so he can reveal who you're meant to be. The palace gave Moses power, but the desert gave him purpose. In Egypt, he learned the ways of kings. In the wilderness, he learned the heart of a servant. And only when he became both could God use him as a leader. So, when you find yourself in a season where nothing seems to move, when you feel like you've lost everything, remember, even the silence of the desert is full of God's voice. A shepherd with a past. Imagine Moses, now older, standing beneath the stars, holding a wooden staff, watching over sheep that aren't even his. Every night, the memories came back, the palace, the river, the mistake. He probably thought, I blew my chance. God could never use someone like me. But God was not finished. He never is. God doesn't waste pain. He transforms it. And every day Moses walked that desert path, leading those sheep, he was unknowingly practicing for the mission ahead, to lead God's people through another wilderness. The very desert that looked like the end was preparing him for the Exodus. Gemstone lessons from the desert. 1. Sometimes you have to lose the palace to find your purpose. Comfort can keep you from calling. Moses had to leave the gold of Egypt to find the glory of God. Don't mourn what you've lost. Sometimes God removes what's temporary to reveal what's eternal. 2. God uses our failures as training grounds. Moses' greatest mistake, killing the Egyptian, didn't disqualify him. It redirected him. God can redeem even our worst moments and turn them into preparation for his purpose. 3. The desert teaches dependence. In the palace, Moses had servants. In the desert, he had God. When everything else is stripped away, you learn who truly sustains you. 4. Waiting doesn't mean wasting. 40 years in Midian might look like delay, but it was development. God often hides his heroes before he unveils them. Every shepherd season leads to a calling season. The skills Moses learned with sheep, patience, guidance, protection, were the very qualities he would need to lead a nation. Speech balloon reflection for the heart. Maybe you, too, are in a desert. You've left something behind, a dream, a relationship, a place you thought defined you. And now you feel like life is standing still. But hear this truth. God does his best work in the wilderness. When you feel like a fugitive from your own past, God sees a future full of redemption. When you think your story is over, God is just turning the page. Like Moses, you may not understand it now, but this desert, this quiet, hidden place, is shaping you for something greater. It's where pride dies and humility grows. It's where fear fades and faith begins. It's where you stop asking, why me, and start saying, here I am, Lord. Some behind small cloud ending message. In the world's eyes, Moses went from prince to nobody. But in God's eyes, he was going from potential to purpose. He left the comfort of Egypt and entered the heat of the desert, only to find the warmth of God's hand guiding him. Maybe that's your story too. Maybe you've left behind the place you once thought was everything. But remember, the desert isn't punishment, it's preparation. God is teaching you, molding you, and building you for the moment he'll call your name again, just like he did for Moses at the burning bush. Because when God calls you out of hiding, no failure, no fear, no Pharaoh can hold you back. You're not lost, you're being found. You're not forgotten, you're being formed. And the same God who met Moses in the wilderness will meet you in yours. Hold on. The bush is about to burn. Was an ordinary day. The same sun rose over the same desert hills. The same flock wandered through the same paths. And Moses, now an older man, guided them as he had done for 40 years. Nothing about this day looked extraordinary, but heaven was preparing a meeting that would change history forever. Sometimes, God hides his greatest moments in ordinary days. Shiva writes the day of encounter. Moses led his sheep to the far side of the wilderness, near a mountain called Horeb, known later as the Mountain of God. The air was dry, the rocks were hot beneath his feet, and the sound of the sheep filled the stillness. Then, something caught his eye. In the distance, a bush was on fire. But this was not normal fire. The flames burned bright, yet the bush wasn't consumed. Moses stopped. He stared. His heart raced. He said to himself, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. As he stepped closer, the air itself seemed to tremble. And then a voice called out from within the flames. Moses, Moses. Moses froze. His knees grew weak. He had heard his name before, from his mother, from Pharaoh, from the people of Egypt, but never like this. This voice carried eternity in it. It was the sound of the one who had formed him, the one who had watched over the basket in the river, the one who had never left him, even in the desert. Moses answered softly, Here I am. And God said, Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. In that moment, the sand beneath his feet became sacred. The wilderness, that place of exile, became a sanctuary. Because when God's presence shows up, even dry ground becomes holy ground. God reveals his heart. Then God spoke again. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he hid his face, afraid to look at God. The holiness of that moment was too great. But God continued, not with wrath, not with anger, but with compassion. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them and bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. Then God said the words that would change Moses' destiny forever. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Pensive Moses' fear and God's grace. Imagine the weight of those words. 40 years earlier, Moses had tried to help his people and failed. He killed a man, ran away, and had lived in exile ever since. Now, after all those years, God was calling him back to the same place, the same Pharaoh, the same mission he thought he had ruined. Moses stammered, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He was saying, Lord, I'm not the man I used to be. I'm not strong. I'm not confident. I'm not worthy. And God replied with words that still echo through eternity. I will be with you. That was it. No long explanation. No list of credentials. Just the promise of his presence. Because when God is with you, you already have everything you need. The God who has no equal. But Moses, still uncertain, asked, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said, I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent me to you. This was the first time in history God revealed his name in this way, I am, meaning the self-existent, eternal, unchanging one. The God who was, who is, and who will be forever. The bush. Burned without being consumed because it represented a God who burns with passion and holiness, but never runs out of power. High voltage, the signs of calling. Still, Moses hesitated. Fear gripped him. He said, What if they don't believe me? So the Lord gave him signs, miracles that would prove God's power was with him. He told Moses to throw down his staff and it became a serpent. When he picked it up, it turned back into a staff. Then God told him to put his hand into his cloak, it became leprous. When he did it again, it was restored. God was showing Moses that the same hands that once failed could now be filled with divine authority. But even after all this, Moses said, Lord, I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue. And God answered, Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Still, Moses pleaded, Please, Lord, send someone else. Even then, even in his reluctance, God didn't reject him. Instead, he provided help. He said, "Your brother Aaron will speak for you. I will speak to both of you." Because God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. Globe showing Europe, Africa the weight of the mission. As Moses left that mountain, staff in hand, the world itself seemed to shift. He wasn't the same man who had entered the wilderness. He walked down that dusty path carrying not just a stick, but a promise, a commission from the living God. He was going back to the very land he once fled, but this time he wasn't going alone. He had seen the fire. He had heard the voice. He had met I Am. And once you encounter the living God, you can never be the same again. Gemstone lessons from the burning bush. 1. God speaks in ordinary moments. Moses wasn't fasting or praying on a mountain. He was tending sheep. God often meets us in the middle of our daily routine, not in the spectacular, but in the simple. 2. You. Our past doesn't cancel your calling. Moses' story proves that your greatest mistakes can't erase God's plan. The desert didn't disqualify him, it prepared him. 3. God's presence is your power. When Moses said, "Who am I?" God replied, "I will be with you." That's all that matters. You don't need to be enough when God is everything. 4. I Am is still the same today. The same God who called Moses still calls his people today. His name means he is whatever you need him to be: strength in weakness, hope in despair, peace in chaos. 5. Holy ground is wherever God meets you. The burning bush reminds us that any place, your kitchen, your car, your workplace, can become holy ground when God's presence fills it. Speech balloon reflection for the heart. Have you ever heard God whisper your name? It may not come from a burning bush, but through the quiet voice in your spirit, a call to step out, to forgive, to lead, to trust. Maybe, like Moses, you feel unworthy or unqualified. You look at your past and think, God can't use me. But the same God who called a stuttering shepherd can call you too. He doesn't see who you were, he sees who you can become in his hands. All he asks is your willingness to say, "Here I am." The bush still burns today, in every heart that is ready to listen. And God is still speaking names. Maybe tonight he's speaking yours. Some behind small cloud ending message. When Moses left Mount Horeb, the fire of God burned not just in the bush, but in his soul. He had gone from a fugitive to a chosen messenger. From a man of fear to a man of faith. The desert that once broke him had now become the place where God met him. And that's what happens when heaven calls your name. The ground beneath you changes, your heart ignites, and your destiny begins. Remember this. When God speaks your name, it's not to remind you of your failures, it's to awaken your future. So listen. The voice that said Moses, Moses still speaks across time. And if you lean in close enough, you might just hear him say, "Child, I am with you. Go, and I will be your strength." Because the bush may burn in the wilderness, but the fire is meant to live in you. He sun burned hot over the golden sands of Egypt. The palace walls, still tall and majestic, shimmered in the light. It had been 40 long years since Moses had walked these marble floors. Once, he had walked them as a prince, confident, powerful, untouchable. But now he was returning as a servant of God. His heart pounded as he approached the city gates. He was no longer the same man who had fled Egypt in shame. He had met God in the wilderness, in fire, in awe, in divine calling. And now he walked not in fear, but in obedience. "Let my people go." Those were the words burning in his spirit. Words that had come from the very mouth of the Almighty. Aaron walked beside him, his brother, his helper, his voice. Together, they entered Pharaoh's court, a place of power and arrogance, filled with golden idols and the scent of incense. The air was thick with pride. Pharaoh sat on his throne, a man worshipped by his people as a god. He looked at Moses, the shepherd from the desert, and laughed. "Moses," Pharaoh sneered, "you again? The man who once belonged to Egypt but ran away like a coward. What brings you back to my kingdom?" Moses raised his eyes, calm but filled with divine fire. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may serve me." The room fell silent. Pharaoh's smile faded into rage. "Who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know your God, and I will not let Israel go." And so began one of the greatest confrontations in history, between a man and an empire, between pride and obedience, between Pharaoh's will and God's command. Moses did not argue. He did not debate. He simply spoke what God told him. When Pharaoh refused, Moses lifted his staff, and the miracles began. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline, turned to blood. Fish died, and the stench filled the land. Pharaoh's magicians tried to copy it, but they could not undo what God had done. Still, Pharaoh's heart hardened. Then came the frogs, swarming through palaces, ovens, and beds. Then gnats, then flies, then disease upon livestock, then boils, hail, and locusts. The proud empire of Egypt began to crumble under the power of the living God. And yet Pharaoh's heart remained hard. Each time Pharaoh pleaded for relief, Moses prayed, and the plague lifted. But as soon as it was gone, Pharaoh returned to his pride. This is where we see one of life's greatest truths. Sometimes God allows stubbornness to reveal his strength. Sometimes he lets the world's pride stand tall, only to show that no one stands taller than him. But this wasn't just a story of plagues and punishment. It was a story of faith under pressure. Imagine Moses each night, exhausted, praying for strength, hearing Pharaoh's mockery, seeing the suffering around him. Every time God told him to go back to Pharaoh, it meant facing rejection again. Yet he went. Because when God calls you, obedience matters more than results. God was teaching Moses something profound. Deliverance is not about how strong you are, it's about how surrendered you are. Moses was learning to trust God even when things didn't seem to change. Each act of obedience was shaping him into the man who could lead millions through the wilderness. Sometimes your obedience won't bring instant change, but it will bring transformation inside you. Finally came the last plague, the most painful of all. God told Moses, "One more plague I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. After that, he will let you go." It was the night of the Passover. Every family of Israel was told to take a lamb without blemish, to sacrifice it, and to place its blood on their doorposts. "When I see the blood," God said, "I will pass over you." That night, the angel of death moved through Egypt. From the house of Pharaoh to the house of the poorest, every firstborn son of Egypt died. A cry rose through the land like thunder, the sound of loss, of judgment, of broken pride. And Pharaoh, crushed at last, called for Moses. His voice trembled as he said, "Go. Take your people. Take your flocks. Take everything. Leave Egypt, and bless me also." Moses stood silent for a moment. The day he had prayed for had come. The God who had promised deliverance had fulfilled it. And so, with faith and haste, the people of Israel gathered their belongings, their unleavened bread, and began the journey out of Egypt, out of slavery, into freedom. It was not just a physical journey, it was a spiritual rebirth. The image of Moses walking out of Egypt that night is powerful. Behind him lay the empire that once enslaved him. Ahead lay the unknown wilderness. But above him, the presence of God. This part of Moses' story speaks directly to every believer today. Sometimes God calls you to confront your Pharaoh, your fear, your addiction, your pain, your past. It may seem impossible. You may feel small. But if God has spoken, victory is not a question. It's a promise waiting for obedience. You cannot stay in Egypt and fulfill your purpose. You have to face the pharaohs that try to keep you bound. Moses didn't walk into Pharaoh's palace with confidence in himself. He walked in with confidence in God. That's what faith looks like. It's not arrogance. It's not shouting louder than your enemy. It's walking in with quiet assurance that the one who sent you will fight for you. The story of Moses and Pharaoh isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror for our own lives. Each of us has a Pharaoh, something that says, "You'll never leave. You'll never change. You'll never be free." But God says, "Let my child go." Maybe your Pharaoh is your past, haunting you with guilt and shame. Maybe it's fear, whispering that you're not good enough. Maybe it's bitterness, pride, or doubt. Whatever it is, when God's word speaks, no Pharaoh can hold you captive. Deliverance begins when you stop arguing with your Pharaoh and start trusting your God. As Israel walked away from Egypt that night, the stars shone above them, symbols of God's ancient promise to Abraham. Every step they took was a testimony. God keeps his word. And though Pharaoh would soon change his mind and chase them again, for this moment, the people walked free, the chains of 400 years falling behind them. Moses had obeyed. God had moved. Freedom had come. And maybe right now, you're standing in your own Egypt feeling like freedom is far away. But remember Moses. Remember that obedience opens the door to miracles. When you speak what God tells you to speak, even the hardest heart cannot stop his will. The same God who broke Pharaoh's pride can break the power of anything holding you today. So lift your head, child of God. Speak with faith. Confront your Pharaoh. And watch the Red Sea of your situation begin to part. Because when God says, "Let my people go," no power in heaven or earth can stand in his way.